Now, busy lives often lead to stress, but for the millions of Australians enduring week after week of lockdown, working, schooling from home, a different kind of fatigue has set in. Burnout rates are on the rise, and some professions like healthcare are staring down the barrel of a mass exodus of workers. In his new book, Burnout, Professor of Psychiatry at the University of New South Wales and founder of the Black Dog Institute, Gordon Parker, explains why this condition is considerably worse than just being a bit stressed.
Clinical observations suggest that generally, burnout symptoms all emerge and increase slowly. The sufferer commonly notes exhaustion first and then experiences a leaching of pleasure from previously enjoyed activities and a lessening of care for other people. Initially, the individual may construe the changes as normal accommodation. Then they may become apathetic, asocial and withdrawn, feeling helpless and judge that life has lost much of its meaning.
Now, Gordon Parker is going to be joining us in just a moment. Corinne, to you first of all on this, have you gone through a period of burnout, and what did you learn from it, if you have?
So I have gone through a period of burnout when I first started as a lawyer, and it's all of the regular things that we have thought about as being burnout pre-pandemic. So overwork, not a great work culture, unreasonable demands by management, so forth and so on. What I learned from that, I think, is a really important thing for people to understand, is that once you become burnt out, it's not simply a matter of removing the stress, changing job, for example, or something like that. You need a period to recover. It's a real illness. So you are psychologically, you're exhausted, but you're also physically exhausted as well. All of that cortisol that's been coursing through your system causes all kinds of blood pressure issues, weight issues, the whole works and jerks. So it's not just a matter of being able to quit one job and the next week start the next and just go, found a new job, everything's going to be fine. You've got to recover. And that can be a really difficult thing to find the time to do.
And what about companies, do you think too often we think of it as an individual problem with individual solutions? There's a lot of companies now that run resilience training programs.
Don't even get me started on resilience training. If you work somewhere that said, we're going to do resilience training, resign immediately. Just resign. And if there are any employers or HR people watching this show now, here's an idea. The amount of money that you are paying for a resilience consultant and for your fruit basket that turns up to work once a week and your compulsory wellbeing activities, pull all of that money together and hire some more people.
Right.
Then people won't get burnt out because there'll be enough staff.
Oh, we have Gordon Parker now. Let's get his views on the resilience training and many such things. Gordon, welcome to The Drum.
Thank you very much, Julia.
Now, can I ask you, first of all, how does burnout differ from depression? What are the telling signs?
Well, perhaps if I define burnout first of all.
Yes.
There are said to be three key symptoms, and that's part of the World Health Organization definition. And it's also been a model promulgated for over 40 years. And those symptoms are exhaustion, a lack of empathy, and compromised work performance. In our research, we give a big tick to exhaustion. Secondly, the issue of lack of empathy, which is sometimes known as compassion fatigue, we find a much broader construct. People basically describe a loss of feeling tone, a loss of joie de vivre, a loss of phosphorescence, if you like.
Oh.
And the third component, of course, compromised work performance is to be expected. That's probably a consequence. There is a fourth component, and that's one of cognitive impairment. People say, I can no longer register information or remember things quite as well. I tend to scan when I'm reading. I'm foggy in my thinking. Along with that goes sleep disturbance. And despite people being exhausted, they're usually describing insomnia And more commonly, they say they're just not refreshed by sleep. And as for all psychological conditions, there's a tail of other symptoms, including anxiety and depression, and particularly physical problems. So we have in our book a wonderful description of a woman who, in a severe state, when admitted to hospital, virtually had no blood pressure at all. Other people can become incontinent, immune functioning is compromised, and so on and so forth. And depression accompanies burnout in about 50% of instances. So that's the broader definition of burnout that we have. And we also need to perhaps add that burnout has been historically linked to those in formal workplaces. Our research shows it's just as commonly to be expected in those with demanding roles at home, be it looking after demanding children and or frail elderly parents. And of course, during COVID with homeschooling, you've got another big scenario.
Got the whole thing going on. Right, so it's like a petri dish for a lot of people, isn't it? Like being at home and having all those responsibilities when effectively your work is never done, when you're caring and working.
That's right. Yes. And the symptom profile is exactly the same in those in the work as in the home environments. But there's another factor that's not in the general definition of burnout that is really important to consider. The general model for burnout is it's a pure consequence of very heavy work factors. What we've found in our research is that people do bring something to the table, and that is burnout is much more likely to occur in good people, those that are dutiful, kind, caring, and perfectionistic. And that is fundamental not only to understanding how burnout develops, but also in terms of managing it. So obviously, we've heard from Corinne, the legal profession is overrepresented with people with burnout because they're required to be perfectionistic. But any caregiving profession that you look at, you know, whether it's health profession, teachers, nurses, veterinarians, and even the clergy have very high rates. So the syndrome is nested within differing occupations disproportionately, and also has a reflection from personality.
Yes, well, the people who are kind, caring, also perfectionist, as you write in your book. I know you provide a lot of tips in your book, but there's going to be a lot of people at home who are nodding their heads and identifying with what you're talking about right now. What is it you would say to them?
I think we've tried to attempt those components within the book. So we provide a broader definition of burnout. We report the lived experience of people who have had burnout and who've handled it, what they've found to be helpful. We make a distinction between burning out and being burnt out. In addition, coming back to your earlier question, we have a whole chapter looking at the features that differentiate depression, which is a state of hopelessness, from burnout, which is more a state of helplessness, but there are multiple other parameters. And then we come up with a model that I think you could see as pluralistic rather than a one-size-fits-all model. So the first component is you do the Sydney burnout measure, and that gives you some idea of the severity. Secondly, there is an appendix in the book that lists a whole set of work contexts, and people can go through and tick which ones apply to them, whether it's time pressures or work conflicts or whatever. There's a perfectionism measure that's there. And then we emphasize a whole series of de-stressing strategies. And the ones that come out top of the pops are talking to somebody and getting it out. Secondly, exercise. Thirdly, having a holiday. Fourthly, after that, mindfulness and meditation seem to be the most highly rated de-stressing strategies. And then the icing on the cake, consider what the personality might be that's driving it. Is it perfectionism? Is it being too caring, relentlessly caring?
Yes.
Is it type A personality and doing something about it?
Yes. Now, Margie, you laughed. We've only got about 30 seconds here. You laughed at the concept of holiday. Unfortunately, it's just not an option right now. Now, you haven't had a break since the bushfires. Like, how do you cope or make sure you don't get burnt out?
Look, I suppose getting up every day and doing a job where you feel you might be making a difference does give you a slightly different perspective. And I'm more than conscious that there are so many people in much more important jobs than mine in healthcare and other spaces. And I can't help but think that while that may contribute to the burnout factor, it probably helps them to kind of put one step in front of each other and get out of bed. But I'm all for holidays being a major treatment option as soon as possible.
Yes, please make that happen for all of us, Margie.
Got it.
I also should say, if this topic has raised any issues for you, please call Lifeline 13 11 14 or Beyond Blue 1300 22 46 36.